I just want to introduce myself first off, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I just want to take a minute to kind of give a little bit of an idea about what we do at Celeritas. But first off, my name is Daniel Valdez, and I'm a project manager here at Celeritas. Celeritas Digital is a technology solutions company that's been focused on building innovative tools for the animal health industry since 2012. And we work with a range of clients, including large pharmaceutical companies, veterinary clinics, and startups, creating solutions that benefit pet owners, veterinarians, and other players in the animal health ecosystem. We've been hosting webinars like this since 2022. Our goal is to bring together industry leaders and specialists to share what they've learned so that others within the industry can benefit. And today, we're excited to have you with us in our first MENA region focused webinar, and look forward to an engaging session with our very special guest, Mike Kitchen. You may have heard earlier, Mike is the business manager at the German Veterinary Clinic, as well as running courses at the Veterinary Management Group UK. That's a training organization focused on the veterinary field. And he's also had around 6 years in animal health leadership and is now based in Abu Dhabi. And I would love to have Mike introduce himself. But thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, okay. So 6 years in the veterinary field doesn't seem maybe like a long time, but that's in the back of about 20 years in other leadership and management roles within hospitality, facilities management, and latterly just more focused on leadership and business. 16 years in the UAE, so I feel, as I said to Daniel before, I'm a Brit by birth, but I'm very much a UAE resident by choice, and very much enjoying the opportunities of working and living in the UAE. So very excited that you guys are looking to expand into the region. I think you'll find that there are definitely a lot of opportunities. What I wanted to talk about today is very much something which I've been very interested by in the last few months and years through conversations that I've been having with veterinary leaders in the UK, people working in positions of leadership roles who are acquiring the skills and the knowledge, and the realization that there are quite big gaps, I think, in the way leadership is perceived and the way leadership is being managed, I guess, within the veterinary sector. Okay, so I put a presentation together. We'll work through it, but please, if there are any questions or anything you want to talk about, I think this is kind of a conversation being facilitated rather than just a presentation. So, let's make it a conversation, definitely. Shall I start with the presentation?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Can everyone see on their side?
Yeah, I just want to actually get the presentation up and running.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay, so I mean, the title is basically straightforward: the value of data-driven leadership in veterinary practice. A brief explanation. A brief introduction, obviously, like I said, 16 years in UAE, quite a long time before that in various other roles. 6 years working within the veterinary field, which has been very, very interesting. I love working with veterinarians. I love working with clinical professionals. I think there's so much value that the field, the individuals within the field have, and they don't necessarily realize just what value they contribute. And I think one of the things which I found really, really enjoyable and a great sense of satisfaction is helping veterinary professionals and veterinary leaders actually start to recognize their own value and what they bring to the people around them, as well as what you do on a day-to-day basis. So any opportunity I have to interact with veterinary professionals, I very much enjoy. which is one of the motivators for getting involved with the VMG in the UK, veterinary management group, who are basically a non-for-profit organization that has a very, very good veterinary leadership and management qualification in conjunction with the ILM, basically allowing and helping, enabling veterinary leaders to understand the skills and the knowledge they need to be more effective and more impactful in what they do. And I get a great amount of satisfaction from interacting with everybody within that field. And that's basically why I'm here today. I'm hoping to be able to, share some insights, share some observations, and talk about this idea of data-driven leadership and what impact that can have, both for organizations and teams, and obviously everything which sits within that as well. So what is data-driven leadership? There's a lot of information online, very little which is specific or relating to the veterinary field, which I find interesting. I think that's something which is going to change over the next months and years. But I think data-driven leadership as a whole is something which has become more popular, more fashionable, more recognizable in the last few years. Certainly, I think the changes that have happened with COVID, since COVID, the last 4 or 5 years have really kind of impacted how organizations and leaders within organizations are able to recognize and use data as part of their arsenal, to making good decisions and what to do. I love this middle quote: data-driven leadership, the gap between business purpose and business impact. I think that's something which resonates a lot, the idea that understanding how decisions are made and understanding what tools we have to make good decisions really is the glue that combines your purpose and the impact that a business can have. And this idea also that intuition and personal experience are no longer enough. It's definitely the case. I think especially potentially in the veterinary field to some degree, and the experience I've had with conversations with people within the veterinary industry, a lot of non-clinical decisions are still being made based on assumption, which is kind of strange to me because so much of what veterinary professionals do is evidence-based, and you're looking for ways to get the best data, the best analytics. And yet, potentially, is still making decisions which are not based on that as far as the non-clinical side of the business is concerned.
I think the reason for that is that we in vet school just did not get approached to that. So we learned our profession and we know how to treat animals, but we have not learned how accounting works. We didn't learn how stock keeping works. We didn't know how HR is working. So we were not prepared for that. So we got pushed into this. And if you look at the veterinary clinics worldwide, I think the differentiation between the ones that you say that are personal experience driven are just a majority still, because all this consultancy only comes in with the corporate business that is mainly in the US and UK, but not that much in the Middle East right now.
Absolutely, Dieter, absolutely. I think it's a massively valid point. And you can understand why. If you spent several years learning a particular vocation, when do you have the time and opportunity to obviously understand all those different assets which are required to run an organization, grow a business? It's not something which can happen by osmosis. You need to have the skills and the knowledge there. And I think there is definitely a shift which we're seeing, and I'm confident it will become more frequently seen, that veterinary professionals are now understanding and recognizing where those gaps may sit and what can be done to help fill them, and having the confidence to say, actually, I need some support with this. I think that's an important part of it as well. But absolutely, I think being a great clinician is something which for many people you consider, well, that's enough. You've done so much already. And then adding to that all the skills that go with managing people and managing finances and managing assets and inventories. It's a massive amount of work, and obviously a lot of practices like yourself, you're doing all of that yourself, which is hugely commendable. But at the same time, I think the support is definitely out there to help others in those situations. I like this. There's ironically, I guess, there's not a massive amount of data around to say this is what the impact of data-driven leadership is. But I think we can safely assume that, you know, PwC and the likes who are carrying out these surveys, these, you know, quantifiable kind of measures, this makes sense, you know. And if you think that effective decision making is seen as being 3 times more effective in organizations that utilize data, that's a big impact to consider, you know. And that's something which I think, again, when we talk about the veterinary profession, not the clinical side, but the non-clinical areas where we're talking about metrics to do with people and analytics and the financials, the inventory management, being 3 times more effective with your decision making based on using the data available is massively significant. So this is one of the areas which I really do enjoy getting stuck into, is the idea of what is leadership in the veterinary setting. And I think one of the things which has to be kind of struck off straight away is the idea that there is a right and wrong way of leading people. There isn't, you know. It's very much in context, and I think this is something which is never truer than within a veterinary environment, because there are different ways of achieving results, and sometimes, you know, I think that very dictatorial, do as I say, not what I do kind of approach, a autocratic approach of getting stuff done quickly and effectively, there's a place for that. You know, I think in medical settings, you need people to take control. You need people to have that ability to step up 5 gears and get stuff done. But it's not always the appropriate way of leading in context. You know, I think equally understanding the benefits and the merits of a very much more people-focused approach is important. And whether it's within one person's capability to be able to, you know, in context, adapt and use different leadership styles, or within a leadership team where you've got 2 or 3 different personalities who drive their leadership in different ways, that ability to be able to flex your leadership style is very, very important. Context is very much crucial. You know, I think there's obviously a lot of understandably interest in the idea of contextual care. Leadership in context is equally as important, you know, because when we talk about leadership, the impact it has on people and, you know, profit and patients, one size approach does not fit every circumstance, you know, and there's no black and white kind of right and wrong. There has to be nuances. There has to be different ways of approaching situations, and that's where context is definitely very much important. And obviously, being a data-driven leader is not a fixed approach either. It's something which I think we can consider as being part of the toolbox that leaders have, is understanding how to bring data into decision-making and how they can use that effectively while still retaining the ability to make decisions based on human factors and understanding the complexities of dealing with people. Because it's not always going to be as simple as pulling out a metric and saying that's the way to do it. You know, so when we talk about human factors and emotional intelligence, combining that with a foundation of data means that you're then able to actually recognize where challenges, problems, gaps may exist, why there may be mitigating circumstances or what circumstances need to be taken into consideration, and therefore come with a kind of holistic approach that allows the best fit solutions to be found for these situations. And the ability to adapt and understand context, again, I think is just so crucial. And that's part of the value proposition, I think, for leadership as a whole, and also, you know, when we talk about data-driven leadership. So how do we quantify value for leadership? A lot of organizations, I think, certainly the bigger corporates and probably most of the smaller independent practices as well, will have a very clear idea of what their values are. Maybe not so much what their kind of performance objectives are. I think there may still be a case of just taking it one day at a time and not looking kind of long-term approach as to what we're setting out to achieve. But I think in the last few years, there's been this shift towards the idea of three Ps or the four Ps, I think, which is relevant for the veterinary sector. The idea of having values and performance objectives which relate to your people, profit, patients, and then the planet. And what we're looking for leadership is the idea that value comes, it can be quantified by the impact that leaders have within those areas, you know, whether it's on performance, whether it's on values, or ideally both. As leaders within an organization, we should be able to understand what the impact is and how we can quantify that, you know, and measure it and understand how we can improve those areas potentially. So, you know, when we talk about people, I think it's fair to say that the idea of effective leadership role models good behaviors. We expect employees to be engaged when they have a solid, strong leader within their organization, somebody who can show that they are trustworthy, that they have integrity, and that they are able to mentor the future leaders, as well as, you know, everyone hopefully within the team by role modeling those good behaviors. And again, I mean, there's obviously an awful lot of literature out there already about leadership. You know, we don't need to go into too much detail about the impact on people, but when we talk about the impact of leaders on people, and then tying that into that kind of data-driven approach, there are obviously a lot of metrics that we can start to consider with regards to how we understand that, you know, from the basic of you know, organizational retention rates. You know, are people staying for a long time within an organization, or are you seeing a very, you know, much faster than expected or hoped turnover of team? A lot of that can be significantly impacted by the leadership within an organization. When we talk about profit, obviously effective leadership and effective decision-making will impact profit. It'll impact performance, financial performance. But different types of leadership will impact in different ways. And again, we can look at those very much more transactional leadership approaches, which drive performance and drive output, which will have a significant impact on financial performance, maybe in the short term, mid-term, maybe not so much in the long term. Other leadership approaches may have an equally impactful influence on financial performance, but in different ways. You know, again, going back to the idea of employee retention, for example, it's far more cost effective to retain employees and train people for the long time who will then be able to perform better over a sustained period of time, rather than always, you know, recruiting and finding new people. So financial performance can be impacted in different ways by different types of leadership style. Patients, again, my focus is very much on the non-clinical areas, but I think it's kind of common sense and straightforward that patient outcomes are obviously going to be impacted positively by high-performing, well-performing teams that are being led effectively and are able to carry out their roles and carry out their responsibilities in a way which is positively going to impact, you know, patient outcomes and seeing people coming back, you know. And I think that's part of the whole veterinary conundrum, is to make sure we're seeing the same patients time and time again over a prolonged period of time. So absolutely, patients are impacted by, you know, leadership and impacted by team performance. And finally, the planet aspect, I think, and certainly, unfortunately, in this part of the world, maybe it's not given the priority that it could be and should be elsewhere. But there is definitely a shift towards a more environmental understanding, and sustainability as being something which is at the core of how businesses should be run. But based on, I guess, my kind of experience, I think there's still an element of it's only really being seen so much in organizations that have leaders that have a more ethical approach and want to do the right thing, because it may not be seen as being such a core area as, you know, obviously the people and the profit aspects of business. So those are the areas where, you know, leadership can absolutely bring value and add value to an organization. You know, and different leadership styles, different leadership methods will impact in different ways. But so why should leaders care about data-driven and, you know, evidence-based leadership? Well, it's one of the questions which I ask, and I think in the last couple of years, I've probably spoken to 60, 70 leaders within different types of role within the UK, primarily veterinary sector, asking about what their impact is and how they feel those impacts and outcomes are able to be defined. And one of the things which is very, very clear is that there's often a lack of understanding what the evidence would be for that. When we talk about leadership on, performance or on organizational values, we can make assumptions, we can throw out sort of what we think might be happening, but it's very rare that we can actually evidence why or what the actual details, what the data is that reflects the impact the leaders have, and obviously how that kind of ties into organizational performance and values and everything else. Which is, again, like I say, it's kind of strange to me, because I think there are so many aspects of the veterinary sector which is absolutely reliant upon clear information and data and being able to communicate these things effectively, and yet we're still making assumptions for a lot of the really important stuff, when it comes to managing people and managing everything non-patient related, and without that ability, I think it's going to be very difficult for veterinary organizations to take that next step forward confidently. So when we talk about evidence, data, obviously it's a foundation for building evidence. And when we say evidence, we're not necessarily, the two words aren't interchangeable, and I'll mention that later on. But being able to utilize data means that we're able to actually build evidence that demonstrates that what we're doing is right, is correct, is having the impact that we set out to do. Or if it's not, that we can course correct and make some alterations. We're able to review and able to measure the impacts that are being had through an organization, whether by leaders or whether, for the day-to-day running, which is obviously hugely important, but it's also very much integral to the idea of quality improvement and continuous improvement, which are also aspects which I think in the last 4 or 5 years have been seen to be far more prevalent within the veterinary world as well. They've obviously been around bywords for quite a long time in many other sectors. But the idea of being able to recognize where an organization or where a team or where even a process has gaps that can be improved and go through a quality improvement or continuous improvement program is something which is obviously very beneficial to organizations as well, and is driven by effective leadership. So we obviously have a lot of data available to us. When we look at day-to-day, whatever we're touching in the clinic these days, you've got access to, reports and records, and whether it's PMS data, or if we're talking about, marketing, your social media analytics, whatever aspects of a business you think is relevant. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of stuff. I think sometimes it can be a little bit confusing or, challenging to actually dial down the white noise of being overloaded and focus on what you need to actually be looking at. Without going into kind of too much of a simple aspect, you've obviously got the two primary types of information. You've got your quantitative, your metrics, which is very much what we're focusing on for financial performance, your output, your productivity as far as clinicians and what's being seen on a day-to-day basis. So those metric-based streams of information are obviously very, very important to make sure we have the right information at our fingertips. And then you've got the qualitative feedback as well, the more kind of emotional driven. This is how people feel about what they're seeing and doing, which is also hugely relevant and something which I think we need to be taking note of, because there's a lot of information contained within feedback, and even if it's quite subjective, we're still able to mine out the stuff which makes sense and we want to be able to utilize. Obviously good examples, and I've got a love-hate relationship with Google reviews, because, you know, certainly I think a lot of veterinary organizations will feel the same. It's become a platform for voicing, you know, whatever kind of nasty approaches some people have, which is fine, that's their opinions and whatever else. But also within the reviews, you find that there are potentially areas that can be really useful, and you can define opportunities to improve and to move things forward. And they're a good example of the idea of combining the quantitative and qualitative aspects of information, because obviously you can use your ratings and nothing but the ratings and think, yeah, we're 4.5 stars, we're doing really great. But it's within the information, within the qualitative feedback, where you actually might find, you know, the stuff that can actually really help to improve and to highlight where an organization can move and do things differently. You know, putting the two together obviously means that we can actually have an effective understanding of both the information, you know, for improvements and verifying that what we're doing is good, and also the idea of having a metric-based kind of rating system as well. So it's a simple, obviously simple example. Okay, so when we talk about data, we consider evidence and data, it's important that they're not interchangeable. You know, data needs context to be considered as being evidence for something. You need to be able to approach data with an idea of what you're measuring or why it's relevant, valid. And, you know, the idea of having an evidence-based approach to kind of the bigger decision-making processes is really important, but you still need to have that foundation of data in place to make sure that you've got the building blocks in place to actually have, hopefully, objective, usable evidence to help you make those bigger, more kind of organizational strategic decisions. Okay, so I think one of the things which I wanted to kind of think about here with the idea of evidence and data being not quite the same thing. When we talk about making effective assessments and making sure that we're able to understand what's happening within our organizations and why it's happening, and what can we do differently to change outcomes or make improvements, that's where you want to be able to build evidence, which could be a collection of different types of data. It could be, you know, the use of employee surveys. It could be customer surveys. It's a collection of different types of information, basically. But at the same time, we also need to be able to utilize data to make dynamic decisions, you know, to understand in the moment when something needs to be changed, when something might not be performing to the expectations that you have. And I think, you know, we've been going through such a turbulent period in the last 2, 3, 4 years. We need to understand that it's important to be able to make quick decisions and be agile in how we approach our decision making, you know, and have the opportunity to utilize data which is readily available within our organizations, but to use it to make effective decisions quickly when needed to be. And obviously in doing that, going back to what I was saying before, combining the use of data with the opportunity to actually still have the emotional intelligence and human factors as being part of decision-making processes as well, because they're key parts of veterinary organizations. Okay, so again, it's pretty simple stuff, but the first step, ensuring you're relevant, accurate data. I mean, it goes without saying that if your data is not correct, if it's inaccurate, if it's not being inputted accurately, then you are actually probably in a worse situation than if you had no data at all, because, you know, if you base decisions on wrong information, you're going to make bad decisions. But within a veterinary organization, you would expect your PMS, your practice management systems, to obviously have reams of very usable, very accurate information. I think a lot of organizations now may be going down the route of having a separate CRM system of some kind as well, whether integrated with the PMS or alongside. And again, that information needs to be accurate. Hopefully it'll be linked and able to pull up information from the PMS, but it has the source for, you know, usable data for you. Obviously, anything which is financial reporting programs, again, very much data driven. And I think there are many organizations now that have gone down the route of looking at carrying out personality assessments or behavior assessments for their team, understanding that different personalities and different approaches are important to recognize and to try and create teams where you are, bringing everyone's abilities together in a way which is going to synergize as opposed to cause conflict. And again, these are obviously very, very useful platforms for information and understanding the people-related analytics that exist out there. And all of these systems and platforms, they will obviously have, very easy to use, reporting functions, as long as you're asking the right questions and putting the right parameters in place. So the information's there, it's all very much available. It's just a case of making sure that we're using it and we're actually understanding what it is that we're looking for within our organizations. What data do we, as a leader within your organization, as a head nurse or head receptionist or clinical director, what information do we need to be making good decisions? What are our KPIs? What are the red flags that we should be looking out for? Not waiting for things to go wrong and then trying to fix something 3 months after the fact, but being able to recognize in the moment from your daily reports that something isn't quite right, that maybe something has shifted and you need to correct it. And obviously with that, we talked about the opportunity to build objective evidence, because we still need to make sure that we're able to assess what we're doing and make sure that what we have done is in line with what we're hoping to achieve. I think that's obviously very, very much common sense. And through that process, we are able to then start to look at decisions that we're making and the actions that follow from clear decision making. This is just a very brief, it's almost like a brain dump, I suppose. In any organization, there are a lot of decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis, and whether they are financial, whether they're down to the people and how we're planning our workforce and how we're actually looking to manage developing individual skills, developing succession planning, and what we're doing to actually kind of future-proof our businesses. How we're looking at those customer interactions. Are we measuring them, and are we making sure that we've got plans in place to acquire if we need, and we probably all do need to acquire customers, but also to retain customers. What the competition's doing. I think in the UAE, this part of the world, competition is something that we know it's out there. We're kind of looking over the parapet and seeing what other people are doing, but we haven't really got a clear idea because there's very little kind of communication between different veterinary organizations. So we're making assumptions about what other people are doing. And for marketing, anybody who's working in the veterinary world knows now how important marketing and having a good understanding of the impacts of social media and how we can drive sales towards our businesses, how important that is. But we need to have metrics, we need to have the ability to actually analyze data to know what we're doing, because I think it's fair to say that there are very few marketing agencies out there who understand the veterinary field as well as we would like, which means a lot of veterinary organizations are still doing marketing in-house, which is quite challenging. Culture and values, what decisions we make obviously impact what our culture wants to be or what we see and how it's shaping up, and the values that organizations have. Are they aligned? Are we in danger of creating cognitive dissonance by making decisions and taking actions which actually counter the values that we have in place? What these decisions are in terms of being macro or micro. Are they based on the world around us or the clinic, within our kind of four doors and the stuff that we're doing on a day-to-day basis? So the breadth of decisions that are being made in veterinary organizations, they're massive, and we need to, I think, recognize the value and the importance of making sure that we use the tools and the resources out there to help make good decisions. And the idea of the macro and micro decision making, I think, is very important. when we talk about micro decisions, we're talking about what's happening within our organization, what's happening within our team, what's happening within that day, as far as, our sales matching up what the expectations are we hitting, output, productivity kind of expectations. What can we do to improve those internal operations? What can we do to make sure our workforce is being utilized effectively, with obviously taking consideration for the soft skills that go with that, because we all understand that compassion fatigue and burnout are very real aspects of the veterinary world. So we have to get the balance right. So those micro decisions are very much something which data is there to support and to help drive good performance. It's, I think, really interesting when we start to look at the macro environment for what that means for veterinary professionals and veterinary organizations, because that's where we start to look at those longer term strategic decisions that we can and should be making based on the information and data around us. I think one of the things which has proven to be very useful and is part of the core syllabus with the VMG is doing an environmental scan, understanding what the factors are that are impacting our organizations at any given time, and starting to plan and to put mitigating kind of ideas in place to try and hopefully minimize risk, or even better, start to create opportunities from potential risk factors, because we're able to preempt and actually understand what we can do differently. And when you look at, for example, the UK veterinary market at the moment, there are so many challenges which are being faced, but a lot of organizations have been able to pivot or adapt to those situations, and despite the challenges are able to still perform effectively and do well. I think this is something which is definitely a big element of how leadership and data-driven leadership can positively impact organizations. So yeah, when data-driven leadership applied in assessing, without reading it word for word, we're all very much aware now, I think, since February, March 2020, how quickly things can change, and being able to be agile in an organization and to understand the impacts quickly for what's happening around us is something which, isn't just a nice to have, it's a crucial must have now. Whether it's for, a small independent practice or a large corporate organization, the ability to be agile and to pivot and to change and to adapt to factors outside of our control is something which has, been realized as very, very important. But maybe questionably whether it's still something that organizations take seriously, despite the lessons that have been learned from COVID in the last 3-4 years. I think potentially there's still a default of a wait and see approach rather than being preemptive and proactive and trying to take the lead on things that are about to happen. So yeah, that's obviously, just to try and summarize that, the idea that data-driven leadership, it's part of the superpower for veterinary practices in adapting to those macro environments and the micro environments changes and things that could potentially be a threat. Try and preempt, try and actually understand what can be done to make them into a competitive advantage by making those better decisions. And going back to that kind of, called a brain dump, all those things that happen on a day-to-day basis, if we're not making decisions based on data, if we're not making decisions based on facts, then we're making them based on assumptions, and there's obviously the probability, high probability potentially, that, basing too many decisions on assumptions is not going to lead to the best outcomes, whereas we know that the data that's available for us, it's constantly being updated. And if we start making decisions based on partial data, the opportunity is still there that we can very easily kind of course correct and make sure we keep aligned to where we want to be. by making sure we have that agility and that approach of understanding as leaders how to make good, effective decisions. But very clearly, that's not to say that we don't still use experience and intuition, because, you know, it would be a criminal not to use all that wonderful knowledge and understanding that's out there. But where we could back it up with data, that's what we should be doing, you know. And I think a little example there, but there are so many examples of day-to-day decisions being made that are better if they have that basis, that foundation of data in place for us. And with that, and going back to the idea of contextual leadership, this is never going to be a case that we're making decisions and data-driven leadership is better than, you know, traditional leadership and the soft skills and the human factors. That's not the case. What we want to be doing is creating an environment where decisions are being made based on evidence, based on data, but also with, you know, the approach of what's best for teams and the individuals as well. And we're getting those kind of holistic decisions being made. Okay, so this is something which I was thinking about. What's the simplest way of kind of explaining a data-driven approach? And I came up with this because it seems A, relatable, and B, it's fairly kind of common sense based. Yeah, veterinary practice, you've got preventative care, obviously the foundation for most organizations, the revenue streams. You've seen a drop. You're not too sure exactly why or what, nothing much has changed around you, but you investigate, you look at the numbers, you look at the data you have, and you find, obviously within your PMS system, that you've got reminders being generated, and you look at the reminders and you look at the uptake and reminders being positively adhered to, and you find there's been a big drop. Yeah, okay, so going into that a little bit deeper, you look at it and you figure out that actually there could be something quite straightforward here, because you've had the data, you've done the analysis, you recognize what potentially could be changed, and it could be something as simple as a communication preference not being ticked on your consent forms, for example. So simple actions, the front office team, the task to actually pick up the phone or get in touch and update the client records. On the basis of one simple change and updating your records and permissions, you end up seeing those routine preventative appointments becoming not just where they were, but, you know, increasing and bringing, you know, footfall back through the door again. And obviously in doing that, and you've had the interaction with clients, you know, the follow-up idea of having a, you know, customer survey and just getting a satisfaction scoring, it helps you to kind of close the loop on that, because you can see that you've actually gone through a process of identifying the problem, recognizing a solution, you've analyzed data, and then you've come to you know, measuring, reviewing, and you've taken a customer survey just to give you a final full stop at the end of that sentence, which is good because you've gone through that process and you've recognized that it works. So I think that's probably quite an easy to relate to example, you know, hopefully not too simple. So I'm not sure that's. I just had a pop-up come up, which. There we go, good. Okay. So, challenges. Like I said, this was always just going to be a brief kind of exploration, a very surface level kind of summary, but a couple of things to consider, like we mentioned before: quality and integrity of data. You know, we need to make sure that what we're thinking of using is accurate, is correct, because otherwise bad data is worse than no data. Knowing your audience, that's something which I am very cognizant of, because when I communicate with other leaders within the organizations I work in, they're not always as interested in data and analytics. So, you know, understanding how you want to communicate and what the message is, and making sure that you are able to provide insights in a way which is meaningful to the audience is very important. Otherwise, it's a wasted opportunity. Be prepared to confront your own confirmation bias, I think, is really important as well, because again, especially when we're in situations where maybe a lot of decisions have been made based on experience and intuition, there may be an element of knowing what you think should be the outcome. And sometimes the data might actually disprove that or conflict with that. I think in those situations, it's important to be able to recognize that maybe what you knew isn't correct, and you want to be able to, double check the data, but have the ability to be flexible. Lack of buy-in, again, organizations which have been working in one particular way for a long time, as with any change, there could be resistance, and especially when that data, the analytics, the reporting may be, highlighting areas which improvements could be, provided. That's not always something which is palatable first time around. So, again, we need to be aware of how we use data and how we're communicating that. A very big one, obviously, I think around the world, there are very different levels of regulation and legalities involved with data protection and privacy laws. All the data that we use within the PMS system obviously has to be considered to be confidential. It's obviously something which we must take very seriously and we aren't able to share. And, if in doubt, we have to seek permission. We have to have confirmation from, our customers, our team, that any data which is related to them, we're able to utilize and treat as confidential. And I think very importantly, make sure that our employment contracts also contain confidentiality clauses, because I think it's something which may potentially get overlooked occasionally. And the idea that the past doesn't always predict the future. So with data, it's a record of what's happened. It's not something which we can use to predict necessarily what's going to happen, but it will give us a pretty good idea of how things may play out. And I think making sure that we understand that there are limitations to data, but that's where being able to analyze and use insight and bring that experience and intuition in as well means that we're in a very, very strong position. Okay, and opportunities, well, they're huge, but I think one of the things which I'm very interested by is the idea that, data-driven leadership is one thing, but data-led organizations is where the future probably wants to sit. And, how we get to that point where all members of a team and all members within an organization are comfortable, with transparency of information, but also, comfortable to understand what that information means and how they can use it. It's something that we should, be looking to bring into, the veterinary sector, certainly, because the benefits could potentially be huge. And from a leadership perspective, the idea of withholding and restricting information is not something that we want to be going down. So the more that we can share, the more that we can bring people on board and empower other members of our teams to feel equal, access to information and the ability to utilize it, the better, because, I think what's good for the teams is good for organizations. And, obviously when we talk about technology, and I've not talked about that at all today, that's where these guys come in, but who knows what's next? We know that AI is already doing big things. If anyone's using PetsApp, we're seeing AI on a teeny tiny scale there, but it's really useful. And the tools that will come with integrating with technology further, who knows where that's going to lead to. And I just mentioned at the bottom, VMG, the training, because there's definitely opportunity for anyone who's interested in leadership, within the veterinary profession or not, but the VMG is very much veterinary focused, to develop those skills, to learn, to understand, and to build the confidence in their own ability as leaders. I think that's going to be massively beneficial for the veterinary sector as a whole. And that's basically that. I think as a very brief recap, the value comes from the decision making, absolutely. Being able to measure and review what we do and understand the outcomes and the impacts that we have. Data obviously is a fundamental part of that. It supports organizational performance and values. it enables agility and the idea of future-proofing our organizations, and the transparency and the free flow of information, I think, is something which, as organizations, we should be looking to try and harness as much as possible, because it does. The evidence is out there. It helps empower teams and individuals, which are obviously things that we want to be doing. And that's that. That's my cat.
I love that photo. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
That was great. I know I have a few questions, but I don't want to take up the space for our audience to ask any questions. So it's a race to ask your first one, audience. If anyone wants to unmute and ask Mike anything that comes to mind right off the bat, feel free. If not, I can start with some questions I have on my side, but I think that was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I would have a question regarding the marketing.
Yes.
I am not sure how to measure the impact of social media marketing. Because even if we have new client or on the new client form a field which says where did you get the information from that we exist or that you want to come to us, most people write like internet or they don't fill it, they refuse to remember where they got it from. And I have the impression when I look at our quite intense social media appearance and the likes and the views that I think the impact is much lower than we think. But how do you have any tips and tricks how to better estimate the impact that the social media appearance has on existing clients as well as on new clients?
It's a really interesting area, because I think one of the things about social media is there are so many variables involved. It depends what your objectives are to start with and how you want to actually plan your social media approach. What is it you want to achieve? And I would probably say that there aren't many veterinary organizations out there that have got social media right. And there does seem to be a gap between the messaging that veterinary organizations want to be able to convey and the traditional marketing agencies, what they actually are capable of delivering, and there's a gap. I mean, from our perspective, we've worked with a couple of organizations, agencies before, and it just hasn't been a good fit. Understanding the metrics that you want to try and measure your performance by is important. For our clinic, we use Facebook and Instagram primarily, and we set a target for our average engagement rate, and the ability to acquire follows, likes, not likes, but basically grow the community have been the two areas that we've kind of focused on. But it's very difficult to see whether there's a return on investment, I think, for that, because we're not selling product online. We're not driving sales to a physical commodity. It's service-based. And I think we're probably taking the approach that if we can scale the community, then there's going to be a percentage of growth, which we see within the clinic from doing that. But I think at this stage, there's probably still gaps in how we can actually measure and understand exactly what those specifics are. But there are definitely platforms, and tools online for being able to measure, those metrics accurately, I think. But like I said, it probably starts by understanding what it is you want to achieve, and where you want to focus your social media kind of efforts.
Right, but you raise a good point, and I also think what Wolf mentioned is a place where the human error kind of issue comes into play when you have people self-reporting, okay, this is how I found out about your practice, or this is how I found out about your service. Yeah. You never really know. and this is something that you touched on, Mike, that I think that um, there's other ways to kind of measure, okay, where is this person coming from? I think there's other tools to say, okay, if I put a link here, like who's clicking on this? Or if someone's coming to this page, where are they coming from? Things like that. But the human error aspect of a lot of the data analysis there, especially when it's reported through surveys and other means like that, is always going to come into play. And so that kind of leads me to the general question about how to kind of approach issues like that, and also how technology might be able to solve that.
Yeah, but if I know who clicked on the link, and if I know how many people liked or shared the post, does not mean that I generated business with it. Because
That's right.
I like a lot of things on Instagram or on other platforms, but it doesn't mean that I will ever go there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and if a client, for example, says word of mouth, then I don't know, was it word of mouth of a person who was in our clinic and is a satisfied customer, or did he just see a post on Instagram and thinks, I will recommend this to my friend because I know his cat is sick. So the problem is, of course, everybody likes data, everybody likes to use data, everybody should use data, but the problem is we can export all our data from the clinic software and whatever, but to get some specific pieces of data, it is really difficult. For example, as I said, the social media impact. And I don't have to invest anything. If I send an email reminder or WhatsApp reminder to anybody of my clients, as there was also mentioned the reminders, but I have to invest money to improve or to intensify my social media presence. And that's why it would be actually very important to have a feedback or to have hard data to check if this is really worth it. But obviously there is no secret tricks to get this data.
No, I think as Daniel said as well, the accuracy of the questions being asked will probably have a very strong relation to the accuracy of the information you get. And I know from just off the top of my head, I'm sure that our PMS system has got 5 categories of client acquisition, internet, Facebook, word of mouth, whatever. That information is not going to give you what you're looking for, But I think if you're able to be more specific on the questions being asked and gathering that information, you might find that you get a better understanding of what the information is telling you. And you're right, 100% agreed that social media, there are obviously benefits, and I don't think any organization now would step away from having an online presence because that could be commercial suicide. But it's very difficult, I think, unless you're actually selling a product through those channels to understand what the impact is specifically, and to measure that accurately. And that's one of the biggest headaches of social media, because you could have a fantastic Instagram profile and 1 million likes, but you may not be getting customers through the door.
One thing I wanted to ask, I always say to my people in the meetings, if things come up, be prepared and be proactive better than reactive. So like COVID and other things have shown us that we can't be proactive because these have been things that are unpredictable. But I think there is a lot of areas within a veterinary clinic where you can avoid an unhappy customer by being proactive. And I think that's a very important point, that in the human, because it's normally a human mistake that a complaint comes in, and it's normally communication, so that we are more proactive on the communication, don't overpromise and underdeliver. which is one of the biggest mistake I think that is happening. I call you this afternoon and then you don't call, or I will come back with you to you within that day and then you're not coming back. So I think that's a very important part that needs to be addressed in regards of, and I don't know how data can help us on that, like telephone lists and stuff like that, how well they are done. And with that, I come up to my next point. KPIs are fine as long as it's figures. Are there any KPI structures in place for the human part? So that are not turnover triggered or sales triggered. So are there any KPIs rather than having the most happiest or employee of the month or the favorite nurse of the month from the employee from the customers voted or whatever? Yeah. Are there any KPI structures in place rather than how long are you working for us? Because I think that's a very important one. So if somebody works for you 10 years, looks like the relationship is okay, but also doesn't mean that that person is necessarily performing well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because again, if you take information, there's people analytics in isolation, it doesn't give you necessarily the picture you're looking for. But when you look at those people analytics, you've got a variety that you can kind of start to consider. Yeah, 10-year length of service is great. Retention rates is important. You want to see organizations that are stable and have people wanting to stay working for them. Does that mean that they're engaged and that they are looking to develop? Maybe not. They could be stagnating. So when you tie that in with the idea of having, I'm sure you've got CPD requirements within your practice, and team members who are working towards objectives, learning objectives and qualifications, and are achieving those things as well. You can tie that into that kind of length of service. Have you got people that are developing these skills and developing their capabilities? Are you succession planning? Do you have, are you setting a target of 80% of new management roles or leadership positions should be filled from within? If that's the case, and you're developing people who have those skills, again, you're kind of broadening the requirement for retention as being your only measure of a healthy organization, because it's not. But if you've got succession planning, you've got people that are engaged, are willing to learn, and they're being supported to do that, and are developing those skills which will benefit your organization, then I think you're kind of changing the picture a little bit from very one-dimensional to more three-dimensional. And then you add in things like unplanned absence and the other very much more basic sort of HR related metrics as well. And you start to get a better feel for what the team and the organization are kind of developing, I think.
The second topic I'm a little bit struggling in the moment is the AI. Because I haven't seen anything, and I have been at a few congresses now where they presented some AI topics. And all of them are actually, if you ask me, not AI. They are just clever algorithms. Because most of these systems are not developing something new. Most of these systems are just filtering in a clever way and giving you answers out of the information that was already present, but not developing anything that was not there before. Am I completely wrong with that? Or is that the reality that AI is actually just a smart filter rather than something developing new? At that level, let's put it that way. Probably there is AI out somewhere, but if an X-ray gets evaluated by the computer for tuberculosis, and of course the computer is not getting sick, is not getting pregnant, is working 24 hours per day, you have a better efficiency, but he is filtering out what he learned from the human, and he's not learning anything additional. He only learns by rejecting an image that he can't read, that then gets read by a specialist and tells the computer again that this is tuberculosis or this is not tuberculosis. But the computer didn't learn anything. The computer is just repeating the same algorithm over a black and white image with information that he got fed with that can be correct or not correct. That's the important thing, that the database is correct. And this learning by the human who tells him that the image that he was not able to judge can judge now because the human told him that's tuberculosis or not.
Sure. And this is kind of an important topic to us, and something we've been thinking about a lot, especially when you mention X-ray technology and things like that. I mean, that's not, our wheelhouse in particular, but we've done so many thought experiments up to this point on topics like that. And I think you're right in the way you've actually simplified AI in a way. I mean, there's so many different forms now, and some companies that are using quote unquote AI or not really, and it's just simpler processes. But I think that in some ways it can be a smart filter. And I've seen it used in a number of different ways. But with X-ray technology, I think that's it's learning from data that it already has access to. And I think that there's ways to make it an ongoing process of learning through course correction too. But I think that that's always going to be a supplementary technology to actual veterinarians. And I think that, but then there's other sort of technology that I think can help with this kind of data-driven leadership when it comes to, I mean, we've been having so many conversations with companies that do AI scribe work in clinics, which takes out a huge level of stress. When you're sitting there taking soap notes, and then but instead you can just take your phone and have a recording going, and it transcribes everything with more accuracy and more more detail than you can possibly do as you're multitasking. So things like that are kind of through natural through I think natural learning, language processing. And I think that can also be used in not only documentation, but in forecasting things like, I mean, you're right about us never being able to really, at least in our small world, not being able to exactly forecast every single possible outcome that we might experience, like COVID, for example. But we can kind of analyze trends on a smaller scale, and apply different kinds of plans based off of that through predictive powers that AI has. And I think that AI can be used in other ways too, like enhancing different practice management systems and telemedicine platforms, which is something we've been experimenting with at Celeritas, and I've seen a lot of positive outcomes from. I think that there's a lot of use for, I mean, I know that Mike also mentioned VR and AR, which, we haven't even begun to have a foray into. That's a whole nother world, which I'm very interested in, by the way. But I think that that can help with analyzing data sets too. I think that if you're training, for example, through VR, it's a lot lower stakes than training on, live animals or with other humans. Like it's those kinds of features of AI or VR or AR that can help move the industry forward. And I think, but I think that the way you're kind of explaining it, Dieter, is in a way correct. But I think that it goes further than just acting as a smart filter. I think that that's something that's changing constantly.
I have to say goodbye. I have a client waiting already. Mike, thank you very much for that. I will just shoot out. Wolf will stay probably a little bit longer. And it would be interesting to meet you somewhere in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Thank you, Disa.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. With that being said, let me, Mike, may I put your LinkedIn in the chat here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're over time by a bit, but I know, I really do appreciate everyone that's joined so far. Here, let me, so in the chat, I'm putting Mike's LinkedIn in case anyone wants to connect with him after this. Highly suggest continuing this conversation. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. If you want to ask, maybe one more before we leave. If not, that's fine. I want to say thank you very much for joining. Like I said, this is the first webinar where we kind of wanted to gather an audience from the MENA region. And so we are hoping to do this every month in tandem with our other webinars. If you have any questions about that or any questions about what we're doing at Celeritas, you can message me on LinkedIn, which I've just put in the comments below. And after this, we're going to be disseminating this recording back to you guys. We're going to be sending out some notes summarizing what we went over today as well. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I truly appreciate it. And Mike, thank you so much for facilitating this. I thought your presentation was great. And I think your cat is very cute. I love this last photo we've been on for a while. Very great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.